Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hello. We're about to start the panel, so if we can... Kuntam, are we streaming now? Good evening, everybody. I'm Gwen Robinson, past president of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand and editor-at-large of Nikkei Asia. As you know, we're here tonight to talk about reporting Myanmar's conflict, tracking and verifying the People's War. We've got an excellent lineup of speakers, but could we have a little bit of silence up the back there, please? Just to briefly go into the Foreign Correspondents Club, we are in our final month before the Christmas New Year break, when we close for about 2 weeks. So that means we have a lot of events coming up in the next coming weeks. So please check our website and Facebook for dates. I'd just like to mention a couple of highlight programs. We have an important panel discussion on December the 1st in the evening about journalism and trauma, focused on reporters' accounts and insights from covering the Thai nursery massacre in early October. Some really strong insights from correspondents who are members of our club. And on other Myanmar-related programs, on Friday, December the 2nd, we have a lunchtime discussion with 2 visiting Myanmar experts, Dr. Mimi Win Bird of the Asia Pacific Centre for Security Studies and Min Zin of the Myanmar Institute of Strategy and Policy. That's a lunchtime discussion at 12:30 p.m. on Friday the 2nd. And on December the 7th in the evening, we will have a documentary screening. I think it's probably a premiere, and discussion focused on the theme of Undaunted, a film by Aung San Suu Kyi and Atan, capturing voices from Myanmar's resistance. There are plenty more programs, as I said, so you can see the full list on FCCT Facebook page and website. Now, turning to this evening's discussion, Myanmar's conflict, tracking and reporting the People's War. As mentioned, we have an excellent and actually very large lineup of speakers. It's larger than usual because of the broad-ranging nature of this theme, and it came about initially through a discussion we were having with Myanmar Witness, which has been at the front line of the documentation effort to cover the escalating conflict in Myanmar, with a series of excellent reports and satellite imagery and analysis. A couple of the Myanmar Witness speakers will mention this again later, but on the wall here in the clubhouse, you'll see some of the finest examples of Myanmar Witnesses' satellite tracking of atrocities and destruction, and some explanation there. So when Myanmar Witness was preparing to issue a couple of very important new reports on identifying the weaponry, arms and aerial vehicles used by Myanmar's military forces in their campaign of suppression, we began discussing the idea of a forum to focus not just on these reports' contents and analysts' explanations, but also to hear from journalists themselves with experience in the field, as well as from human rights organisations, about the so many issues involved in covering this increasingly savage conflict. So to turn to briefly introduce the speakers and then get into the substance of the discussion. On my immediate right here, we have Shun Naing, Myanmar correspondent for Reuters. Next to her is James Hadave, Myanmar team of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Next to him is Aung San Suu Kyi, filmmaker and journalist, who has done extensive documentation of post-coup conflict in Myanmar. Next to him is Anthony Davis, well-known independent security analyst, consultant for Janes, and one of the best writers covering the conflict. And then next to him is Ben Strick, Director of Investigations at the Centre for Information Resilience, Myanmar Witness. And last but not least is Leoni Hadave, arms specialist with Myanmar Witness. So we'd like to first turn to Ben over there. If you could kick off the discussion and tell us a bit about your work there.
Thanks so much, Gwen, and hi everyone. So my name is Ben Strick, as Gwen mentioned. I'd like to just start with pointing over to my right, or your left, at the wall there. We have some satellite images that are actually, this is an exhibition ran by one of our investigators at Myanmar Witness, a super talented investigator from the country. And that person left the country early on in the conflict, and the only way they're able to see what happens now, after internet limitations, after lack of footage coming out of the region, the only way they're able to see what happens is from those images. Satellite images are proof of human rights abuses that happen in the country. Satellite images of villages being burnt down, weapons factories being set up and ran efficiently, protests being squashed, and other things like that. So I beckon you to maybe have a look at those a little bit later, because much of what we're going to talk about is around the capturing and the proof that we have available at our fingertips, every single person here, of what happens in Myanmar. A selfie of the earth is taken every single day, and sometimes it captures events like that. So to talk a little bit about how things like this emerged and how Myanmar Witness emerged, I think I'll take you back to the start, which is really the start of the coup in February 2021. We started up Myanmar Witness as a knee-jerk response, in a sense, to capture footage of those brave civilians on the ground that were willing to film what was happening to them and to put that on social media. But sadly, if we fast forward to times like May, June, July, we're seeing the conflict change from what is violence against protesters in the streets. We're seeing it change to internet limitations, blackouts of communications where people aren't able to upload that footage. Events like Bago on April 9, Lang Tayar in late March, early February, these sorts of events, we're seeing a huge crackdowns on civilians with real bullets in the streets, no right to protest whatsoever. Now we fast forward and we're not really seeing that evidence much anymore, that footage being uploaded online. That's because A, civilians are scared to upload that footage. It gets them in trouble. B, they're just not able to upload it because internet limitations. And C, if they're found where those places are uploaded, they often get retaliations. So, for example, villagers who upload footage of fires or burning buildings are getting stamped upon as soon as they upload that footage. So what we've started to look at is other ways of verifying that information, and we've had to do that specifically as the conflict changes from protests and crackdown of protests to a conflict that's raging in the north of Myanmar, where villages are being burnt down. For example, yesterday, 120 buildings were burnt down in a specific region of Sagaing. No footage was captured of that, just a satellite image. That's all we've had. So by looking at this sort of information and peering through the social media evidence that is uploaded by not only protesters, not only pro-democratic forces, but also the military themselves, we're able to piece together evidence. And that really goes towards my point of accountability. We're able to work with things such as arms munitions, the butts of rifles which have these little stickers on to identify units. We're able to track those units as they go from village to village, burning houses down, segregating men and women and torturing the men and sometimes doing other acts towards the women. We're able to give these units traits so that one day someone will be able to hold those responsible to account through that evidence that wasn't captured by the lens of footage of villages and innocent civilians, but was captured on satellite imagery and by soldiers themselves and uploaded to social media. So this really goes into my other aspect that I wanted to speak about before I hand on to my fellow panelists, which is around some of the things that we're working on, around investigations, so documenting that activity in the north, but also around building that community. And I think I'd like to sort of finish on this point. We can see here already that we have such an integral community, not only focusing on the verification work that we do, but also on reporting on that. And that goes towards accountability. The community of journalists is a level of accountability and representation for the people on the ground that don't have a voice. The accountability of justice and accountability mechanisms, so we've got someone from the UN here, we're able to see that effort take shape in the future as well. And also accountability around sanctions. So, for example, the weapons that Leoni is talking about, or will talk about in a bit, are providing sanctions towards those companies that allow that squashing, that squandering of villages in the north, like the village that I just spoke to you about that was burnt down yesterday. If you'd like to see our resources, we've actually got a scannable QR code at the back. Don't worry, we're not collecting your information. It actually links to a PDF, which you can view on your phones if you don't want to scan the QR code. And it's basically a PDF of almost 100 pages, so gentle, light Saturday night reading, but of all of the arms or small arms documented in Myanmar used by the Myanmar military. For the journalists in this room, I beg you to use that because it's free. It's for you to use. So if you don't want to credit us, we'd prefer if you did credit us. But if you want to steal that footage, as long as you give representation to the issues that are happening in Myanmar, and also some of the stuff that Leoni will talk about is content that's not necessarily reported in the media and might make a great scoop or great investigation for you guys one day. We're happy to provide that, and that's part of that essence that I spoke about with the community in sort of tackling this huge problem, which we're not able to tackle the whole thing, but I think together we can make a bit of a difference. So thank you, Gwen, and I'll move on to the next panellist.
Oh, Ben, thank you. That was excellent. And I think we're going to move to some of the reporters who are covering the conflict before we go to you, Leoni, about these reports. So first I'd like to call on you, Aung Naing So, to talk about your experiences and observations and the struggle, particularly as someone focused on images, including film, how much more difficult those challenges are.
Thanks so much, Gwen. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aung Naing So. You can call me Aung. I'm a freelance journalist and a documentary filmmaker, now based in Thailand. So like Gwen said, I've been covering about the conflict in Myanmar for even before the coup, so many years. So as a documentary filmmaker, we cannot construct the story just only by the interviews. We also need to have visuals. But in this moment, there are many challenges to get visuals of the atrocities committed by the Myanmar military. So, as far as I understand, there are a few. There are some main areas that the military has been committing a lot of abuses in the country, all over the country, but there are some area that we have to focus for most of the time. So that's central Myanmar, Karen state and Karenni state. But of course, there are also other tragic events happen in like Kachin state. For example, there was recently airstrike over at least 60 civilians in Kachin state. So to most of those areas, there are internet restrictions in the country, and some areas only have 2G internet. Of course, Ben and Myanmar Witness has investigated many civilians, many brave civilians or local activists or citizen journalists from this area. They capture the images and they try to upload on the internet, but it is not possible for all the time because of the internet restrictions. So in most of the cases, they have to drive for long time, long journey to get to somewhere where they have access to the internet, or they hand SD card from one person to another person until these materials get to the a location where it has internet to upload. And now I'm talking more about the how to get those materials to the hand of us, to the hand of journalists. And of course, I will also talk a little bit about how we try to verify those visuals. So there was a documentary that I worked on for like nearly 2 years. It was for Channel 4. It is available on Amazon Prime right now, and also Channel 4 website if you have an account. It's called The Forgotten War. So we've been following many characters from Karenni State, Karen State, and we have also in contact with some citizen journalists or some journalists in the region. They film for us, and then they send those materials to us. But most of the journalists that we worked with, they are in the area with serious internet restriction. So it was really like really a big challenge for us to get those data. So we had to duplicate so many hard drives and so many SD cards. And then one way we sent to Yangon, and the other way we sent to the border. And then we had to think about like what would happen if one hard drive is damaged, or if our career gets in trouble, you know. So then we got those videos in Thailand, and then to our editors in London, and now the film has come out. So without the work of those brave journalists or citizen journalists or brave activists at the front line, this film won't be able to happen. Also, I'm gonna have another documentary screening on 7th December, like Gwen mentioned in the introduction. It's called Undaunted. It's the voices from Myanmar's resistance. So when I interviewed the characters from this documentary, this documentary is about human rights defenders in Myanmar, like the struggle that they had and how they were tortured, how their peaceful protests were brutally cracked down by the military. So those footages from Yangon and the protests, majority of the protests, it was not very difficult to get access. But the footage about airstrike from middle of nowhere, like central Myanmar or Kachin State, are like really difficult to get. But even after we get those footages, it is another challenge to verify it. In this case, we have to rely on investigative institutions like Myanmar Witness, and we have received a lot of help from Myanmar Witness. So thanks so much again for Ben and his Myanmar Witness team for helping and supporting us. So those, like I mentioned in the documentary about Myanmar human rights defenders and Undaunted, those footages were not very difficult to verify or get access, because those were from main region, main cities like Yangon or Mandalay. But those footage from Kachin, Karen, or central Myanmar with internet limitation, it was very difficult. And then to resolve those challenges, we have to rely on organizations like Myanmar Witness, or like sometimes we have to reach out to local organizations like student unions in central Myanmar, or any other agency, or even like rebels groups, you know, to verify those information. Or sometimes, since there is one last thing I want to talk about, the way that we verify. Myanmar has different dialects in different states and regions. So we also have to listen about the dialect that they had, like whether it's from Rakhine State or Kachin State or Central Myanmar, and then this is how we were able to verify. And please feel free to ask me any question at the end of the panel, or even after the panel. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ong Nang. So we will come back into after these initial comments, and we'll also take questions. I'm afraid tonight probably questions mainly from the floor. I'd like to now turn to Shun Naing, who has done some brilliant reporting with Reuters, award-winning reporting, in fact. But I also wonder, Sean, if you can maybe address also the issue. Reuters is a very balanced news agency. We're talking also about concerns on the other side. It's not just, I mean, it has been, clearly, overwhelmingly a conflict initiated and dominated by the military. But there are issues also of verification on the other side. Anyway, I will hand over to you.
Yeah. So just like my colleague Anaso has mentioned, it has been so difficult to verify information from the ground. So I can like explain a little bit on like how I normally verify my reporting process, and a little bit different from online. So my work is mostly focused on like breaking news, and sometimes it go into in-depth and investigative. But then for the breaking news, there's like always like a time limitation and etc. So let's say there's like an explosion in like Yangon. So no one claims it at the moment, and we always have to rely on the statements of the local defense forces groups. And some of those statements, like we honestly don't know these are legit or not. We have no way to verify them. Like, we have never heard of these groups, and then there are so many groups that come out after the coup. So some of the groups, they are formed by the people we know, like some are like by long time activists, and some we have trust, we have built the trust and etc. But some people we have only talked on phones and like have never seen in person or have never heard of before. So that's one of the struggles we experience in reporting of these people's war on the cities like Yangon and Mandalay. And it's a different story when we report like atrocities or conflicts in the remote area or in ethnic group area. And also in the ethnic group area, there are like two different types. One type is the ethnic groups where their spokesperson or their communication officers would verify for us or confirm us, but then still we have to be aware of the fact that this is also an armed group, and then the information is one-sided. And so we also follow on the other side of the information, like UNTAS groups or some UNTAS lobbyist groups. We have to follow them like using fake accounts for the security reasons, and then we have to check like at the same time. So what is this side said? What is the other side said? And compare the events like sometimes the information is exaggerated in both sides. Let's say there's one reporting like, there's an explosion and 40 soldiers died, and we know it's not true, because one explosion cannot kill 40 soldiers with like basic common sense. Like People's Defense Forces doesn't have that much of a, complex weaponry to kill 40 soldiers in one place yet, or in most of the cases. So these are these instances that we are extremely careful to report. So and there comes the rules of like groups like Myanmar Witness or other documenting groups like who verify this information for us sometimes. And then, but sometimes also their documented information comes from the media reports as well. Like they collect data from the media reports and they try to analyze it. So it's kind of like a cycle of the information coming, So it's not as helpful as you would think for reporters, like because there's no original data collection, and we need to have more and more original data collection from the ground. And also, I believe that we can report almost half of what's happening on the ground. All the media combined, all the human rights organizations combined, we couldn't report. We can only report almost half of what's happening on the ground, and there's still more to be done. But just like my colleague also mentioned, it's all about internet access. We have to physically transfer the data, and which takes like months. So for reporters to go onto the ground, they have to invest at least 3 months to up to 6 months, like to go to the ground, and they cannot just like meet with these group leaders. They won't trust them. So you have to build a trust. You have to build a relationship, and then you have to collect the data, and then those data cannot be like uploaded on the internet because there's no internet. So they have to come back physically where there are so many risks along the way. So when they arrive with the data back to the surface, it's been about 6 months since the event happened, and during the 6 months, the survivor of the reporter, the survivor of the reporter's family, and all these concerns. So it's such a struggle like all the reporters on the ground are facing. As I talk to all my friends who are bravely reporting on the ground and also on the borderline. So the verification is very tricky. We cannot always trust the information from both sides, and we still try to have a balanced report on that. So, yeah. And so we try our best to check up from the different sides of the information, but then we also have to note the fact we cannot individually verify on that information. So, and work of the Myanmar Witness sometimes can be really handy, but sometimes even this organization cannot help with the reporting.
Oh, thanks. I was just saying about the microphone.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Anyway,
Yeah.
was that it? for now?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I can answer, if you guys have more questions on reporting verification, I can answer after the panel. But
Thank you,
I
Shirley.
can hang over to another speaker now.
Okay, over to you, Tony, as someone who has covered the conflict extensively, but in the last, since the coup, I guess, largely from here, relying on clearly a lot of sources.
Yeah, I'd like to make some very sort of general comments. What we've heard so far this evening has been very much specific. I'd like to sort of stand back a little and look at the manner in which this conflict is being projected to the world. And my sense is, and that there are probably some in this room who might disagree with me, but my own sense is that the media generally has done a pretty mixed job. Some days I think it's doing a lousy job. Some days I think it's doing a mixed job, but very rarely do I feel it's doing a particularly good job. Now, what I'm going to say in the coming minutes will perhaps attempt to pinpoint some of the reasons for this. And what I've already said raises the question, what would a good job look like? Was reporting on Syria a good job? Was reporting on Afghanistan a good job? Et cetera, Bosnia, you can go around conflicts in recent years. What constitutes a good job? That's up for everybody to make their own decision on. My sense is what's happening in Myanmar is not a good job. One of the reasons for this is that there is, in a way that perhaps is new, there is a tsunami of data. There is a tsunami of stuff coming out on these things, which is good because it's information, but it's also misinformation and disinformation. So that complicates reporting in any balanced form. That's one factor. The other factor is we're dealing here with a guerrilla war. And it's a guerrilla war which, as you're all aware, has spread from one end of the country to the other. So this is a guerrilla conflict with multiple fronts. It's got multiple players, and there are multiple incidents happening on a daily basis. Some of them are more significant than others. But then again, that raises the question, what is a significant incident? What does a journalist or a reporter decide in his or her own head is worth reporting? So for example, I'll give you a very brief example. I write for Janes, which is a defense and security publishing house. We did not, or I did not, report on the airstrike in Kachin State, which killed 66, or maybe it was 80, or whatever the figure was, people in one attack. I didn't report that, because we don't do that sort of stuff. And the reason that we don't do it is because you can read it in 1,000 different publications somewhere else. I did report on an attack more recently, last week, on the airbase at Magwe, right? What happened in that attack is up for debate, but I felt that it was sufficiently important that a PDF had attacked a major airbase, given what else is happening in the whole airspace, to be worth reporting. And I talked to a colleague in Bangkok in one of the WA services, and he said, no, we didn't report that, because they were busy that day dealing with the release of Sean Turnell and the others who were released in that amnesty. So amid this plethora of incident, what is worth reporting? That's a question. So we're dealing with a guerrilla war. We're also dealing with a civil war, which makes things even more complicated. Some guerrilla wars are not civil wars, and some are. This is. So in this context, we're dealing with an incumbent regime, the State Administration Council, which says little or nothing about what is happening on the ground, about what it does. Virtually nothing. So that's one factor. Another factor is that if you look at the opposition is, they've got verbal diarrhea. There's no problem in getting information from the opposition. It's coming from the National Unity Government, it's coming from some, but not all, of the ethnic resistance organizations, and it's certainly coming in spades from PDFs, right? And the quality of this information is all over the place. So I'll give you an example. The NUG, which you would imagine is a fairly, well, it's not a question of imagination. The NUG is a serious organization with a lot of people doing a lot of hard work. But they put out a statement not that long ago saying that between the 7th of September last year, when they declared a People's Defensive War, and the end of August this year, in other words, in the space of 1 year, the resistance had killed 20,000 Tatmadaw troops. Killed. Now, if you do a bit of quick maths, that translates into 400 a week or 60 a day. Now, I, in conjunction with some colleagues who follow this sort of thing, follow daily incidents closely, I got together and surveyed opinions, discussed this, that, and the other, and we came up with a probable figure of not 60 people, not 60 soldiers killed every day, but between 20 and 25 killed and wounded. So we're talking that sort of disparity. And if you believe that 20,000 or more than 20,000 Tatmadaw soldiers were killed in the space of that year, you're smoking powerful weed. But that sort of stuff is out there, and it's being pushed. So the quality of information coming out is extremely mixed, and this makes life very complicated if you're trying to report stuff. So what are we left with? Who's dealing with all this information? Well, you have the Myanmar media, right? Now, unfortunately, I don't read Burmese, which is a major disadvantage, but my sense, I follow the English language Myanmar media very closely. And what I do know is that the Myanmar media, generally speaking, these are people who are involved on one side or the other in a civil war, right? Two of them are with us this evening. Whether they choose to share their opinions on the politics and, of this civil war is another issue. But journalists in the Myanmar media work in a civil war context. They're part of that war, whichever side they're on. So if you look at publications, very good publications, invaluable publications such as Irrawaddy, Myanmar Now, Mitsima, a lot of the reporting coming out of there, it's valuable. I read it every day. But you've got to take that with not a grain of salt. You've got to take the whole salt cellar, because they're pushing one side in a conflict, and they're doing a pretty good job. So again, that is what the Myanmar media are caught up in. The foreign media are either sitting in the comfort of Bangkok or beyond, people like me, or they're sitting in Yangon, right? And if they're sitting, what is coming out of this mix from the foreign media is either Yangon-centric reporting, right? So a big event, if the prison is bombed, if Sean Turnell, Vicky Bowman are released, this is a very big day for them. They're all over that story. And the other thing that they're very much involved in is atrocity-centric stuff. So if an atrocity takes place, they're all over it like a rash. So I'm not blaming them for that, but that's the environment that they're operating in. What strikes me as, and I'm going to finish on this note, what strikes me as really interesting about this conflict is the striking absence of foreign reporting on the ground. In other words, reporting by journalists who are on the ground and who, by definition, are going to be on probably only one side of this civil war, but they don't necessarily, they're not Myanmar citizens. They're not necessarily invested in that civil war. So, in my own experience, I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. I was with the Afghan resistance, but I could come out and I could write critical stuff. We're not seeing that in terms of the Myanmar context. What we're seeing in Myanmar, and the reasons for this are quite clear. We've got three neighboring states, Thailand, India, three main neighboring states, Thailand, India, China, who have no interest in allowing foreign reporters to go in there and report this and get over the constraints faced by Burmese journalists. So that's not happening. And it's a big problem because I often sit around wondering to myself, what is actually happening on the ground in somewhere like Sagaing, right? I'm talking to one person who's there. He's saying, hey, we don't have any ammunition. We don't have enough guns. In 6 months, our villages are going to be ash, quote, unquote, right? Then I'm talking to other people and I'm reading stuff about what a heroic job the resistance is doing there. So there's doubtless truth on both sides. But having a foreigner in there who can stand back from the partisan politics would make a huge difference. And that, unfortunately, is not happening. So what we're not getting is any sort of more or less impartial flavor of how, a sense of how this is going. And you need to be on the ground to get that. You can't get that sitting in Bangkok or Yangon. So let me end on that point.
Thanks very much, Tony. You've raised a lot of thorny and difficult issues there, but I guess that's part of the reason we're doing this program tonight, about the, possibilities of relying perhaps a bit more on some of this hard evidence of satellite imagery, etc. But it has to be said, I'd like to remind people there is a total of 3 foreign correspondents in Yangon right now, but I think up to recently there was only 1. So that's foreign correspondents, and there's almost no local correspondents who are anything other than state propaganda connected, because no independent correspondent, I think, can operate freely inside. So we're relying a lot on these posts on social media, etc. But anyway, I think we can go into some of these issues later, but thanks for that rundown. And I'd like to turn to Leoni now to talk a little bit about the sort of information you are putting out. I think, Kuntam, we've got some internet imagery of the report. There we go. So over to you, Leoni.
Thank you, Gwen, and thanks to the fellow panelists. Coming from the general perspective to something very specific, and thanks for keeping this easy and light stuff for almost last. This is a bit of a project that we've started. It's been a collaborative effort within Myanmar Witness. This we've started right from the beginning in February 2021. We wanted to get a more precise idea of what was happening on the ground. And we started building the database of imagery resources. For anybody that is familiar with open source investigations, you know already that there is a great deal of information that we can extract from very small details. And some of the primary uses of this sort of resources is to verify the solidity and veridicity of the footage we are analyzing, which seems to be a recurrent point that was expressed during this panel. Not only this sort of information, it's useful to understand the more complex reality and situation we are investigating. Last, because of one of our main objectives being to bring those that are responsible of potential violation into account, we want to provide the the competent organs with the most precise, capillary, and detailed amount of evidence possible. So we've started this. This is an important stepping stone. This is a very easy to access resource that you can download on your phone. We feel now is the time. It's big enough and verified in all of its parts, unless clearly stated. And we feel this is a good moment to share this with the rest of the community. We are part of a community that is very diverse in its nature, and we are tackling the same issue from very different angles. There has been a lot of missed chances when we look at this kind of evidence that we are investigating, and also a lot of inaccurate reporting. We feel that this may help all the people that are not super familiar with this kind of very detailed information and this kind of items. We understand that it's also not possible for everybody to build this sort of capacity. Most people don't even have the time to spend this much time on analyzing such small details. So we have created this resource that is very user-friendly, easy to access. This is not an historical review. This is not a very comprehensive document on the history of Myanmar and its internal production capacities of military items. Because of the history of Myanmar, there has been a very significant development of domestic production of defense equipment, and very little it is known about its specific aspects. So that's one of the reasons why we thought this was necessary to develop indoor in the first place. So the objective of this guide is to help the reader to access very rapidly imagery that he can or she can compare rapidly with whatever they are reviewing online. All the details that you'll find are only about its visual characteristic. We are not interested to the inner working. And you can search details such as color, type, or caliber to help you navigate the documents. The pictures were used in a way to illustrate the most key and clear details, which is what the reader will have to compare with whatever imagery he has in front of him or her on the screen. The second resource I wanted to share with you, this is on the website of Myanmar Witness, or before you leave, you can download it through a QR codes close to the console. The other resource I wanted to share with you is also integrated in the website of Myanmar Witness, is a wiki that we started to build. As the conflict has recently or progressively entered in the new stage, so as our work at Myanmar Witness, and there has also been a change in the work of the rest of the community that has been looking at this. The military is making much more, is relying much more significantly on its air power, so we are seeing this kind of scene much more frequently. We wanted to develop this knowledge, and we're happy to pass this on. Again, this is very hands-on and basic. We are trying to highlight the key features that can be identified even by someone that is not very familiar with these items and does not have a lot of time to spend on this sort of footage. We are also keen in understanding the overall structure and capabilities, in this case of the Air Force. This is also, again, with the final view to bring those responsible into account. And the more the military will rely on these items, the more not only the branch of the military or single units, but we are building an entire outline of people, commanders responsible for single air bases. Information that you'll find on pages of each single aircraft. Now we only have 3, which are some of the most commonly used in the last year by the military. They also includes, and I'm bringing you back the attention to satellite imagery here, to the air bases where these have been stationed and from which they are being operated to launch their combat operations. The last section that I wanted to show you within this wiki is one about the latest notable events. This is something we hope that people within the community of academic observers and journalists that are interested into Myanmar will make good use of as we verify and publish here footage of the latest combat operation in which these aircrafts have been deployed.
Thanks, Leon. I think, can I just ask a question? I think some of the, particularly recently, so much more focus has been put on suppliers, particularly foreign suppliers of arms and also ammunition. I guess we've got a lot lately on jet fuel as well. But do you think how much you mentioned domestically produced weapons, and that all looks, a lot of that looks very homemade, I mean Myanmar made, but how much of the guide tracks the foreign arms, and how up to date is that? Because we've seen a massive surge in arms acquisitions by the Myanmar military since the coup.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this point. Completely forgot about it. So in the section that deals with procurement, this kind of painstaking analysis of every single piece of footage allows us to identify the foreign provision of items such as aircraft, services such as training and mechanics, and ammunitions as well. So the relationship between the foreign provider and the Myanmar Air Force doesn't end with the sale of the aircraft itself. These are very complex business enterprises. We've seen some of the latest deliveries of aircraft, both from China and Russia, happening at the end of 2021, so after the coup of February 2021. And this has also been true, and this is something we've also been able to verify by analyzing footage from the grounds of ammunition used by aircraft against ground targets in civilian areas, by analyzing remnants and used spent casings of the areas where they were employed. We track missiles, air-to-ground unguided missiles that were delivered from Serbia to Myanmar via a Belarusian private airline company. Few days after the coup, we found Serbian 23mm and 30mm ammunitions on the grounds. And this is another area we are closely keeping an eye on and talking about how up-to-date this documentation is, this resource is being updated up until yesterday, so it's pretty fresh. But we are gonna keep it, we're gonna keep adding new platforms and keep an eye on newer footage that unfortunately is gonna probably come up again very soon.
Thanks very much. I think that's probably required reading for anyone covering Myanmar. Very useful. So finally, I'd like to turn to James. Over to you. You've got extensive experience also in Syria as well as now Myanmar. So let's hear from you about the importance of verification and documentation.
Okay, sure. I mean, documentation work is really at the heart of what the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights does. It's really sort of our reason for being. And the reason for that is that the reports we prepare are really, they're intended to be a tool. And the only tool that is really valid for a human rights report is to conduct advocacy. You need a tool to produce change, whether that be to have a tool to help victims eventually get a remedy for their violation, or to simply amplify their voice. The end goal of all of that advocacy has to be two things: protection and accountability. And so that is what we try to do. Now, reports, of course, are at the end of an investigative cycle. So everything we do is about gathering information, primarily from primary sources. We want to talk directly to victims and to witnesses to violations and abuses. And that, of course, as has been described by many of the panelists, in some ways there is a glut of information, and in other ways, in this war that Myanmar is embroiled in, if you look at it as an information war, the Tatmadaw is doing extremely well because they have restricted the flow of information and communications ability massively. And what they have also imposed is a heavy price on those people who want to communicate or take the risk to communicate. And so for us, the prime goal we have on a daily basis is not just to get in touch with victims and witnesses, but to get in touch with them securely, because we don't want to put them at risk. And of course, that is a very big ask. But again, the primary sources have to underlie every ounce of the investigation that you undertake. It has to be a process of triage and diagnosis where you are trying to find the types of incidents and the types of attacks that affect either the most victims or that are indicative of the gravest crimes being committed or that are most emblematic of the current status of the conflict. So those are really the three sort of characteristics that we look at. Now, in other places I've worked, Afghanistan or Syria, the Balkans, this sort of information and data is really what you do in order to construct a solid basis for everything that you report. So the extent to which you can get victims and witnesses to be detailed in your testimony then dictates the detail with which you can report what actually happens or has happened. And there are many reasons why we approach the work in that way. And first of all is that you want people to be detailed because that's frankly the easiest way to detect untruths or misinformation. It's also the easiest way to lead you then to other information sources, other witnesses, other victims who you can also interview in a very detailed way to corroborate the stories of these primary sources. And in the cases where that data is either not fully available or where frankly the information is not fully established, you go to other primary sources like satellite imagery, like weapons identification, basically forensics, ballistic analysis. And to do that, you do need very much an idea of the capabilities of each armed group and the type of weaponry they're using. So these tools that have been developed by Myanmar Witness and by others, Leoni and his team, they are invaluable. Of course, reporting and journalism is also critical as well, because they are the ones who are most likely to have contacts on the ground, so that's how we reach out and can get a hold of people, not just by journalists, but by civil society groups and others. But all of this, again, it comes back to this basic criteria of why are you getting the information? If it's for accountability, this is the sort of detailed information. If you are verifying the information properly, you are verifying it to a legal standard. And what that means is that you're going to provide, first of all, a diagnostic tool to prosecutors in future to determine where they should devote full criminal investigative capacity. Secondly, you're going to have interviewed witnesses in hopefully a detailed, corroborated way, which also then helps as a guide to prosecutors to decide who they want to talk to whenever they want to take a case forward. So that's also a very valuable tool. The last part of all of this, though, is something that I would just sort of mention that I think is rather critical to all of this, which is how do you hold states accountable for, first of all, they can't deny that they know what's happening on the ground, but also other organizations, including my own, the UN. If you know the gravity and the scope of what's happening on the ground, what are you doing to increase protection, particularly protection of civilians? Whenever you have a situation, what was described by Anthony is one of the most dangerous situations you can possibly have, where you're relying on armed groups to tell you how many people they killed, because they'll never be accurate. It's not in their interest to be accurate. Don't expect them to be accurate. But what you do know is that wherever there are soldiers dying, there are most likely civilians dying too. And what is important is to demystify those numbers, to get a good idea of the scope of those figures, so that organizations can take the proper steps to protect the people they're there to help, to protect their beneficiaries, to protect their staff that are delivering aid, but also to hold the people like the Tatmadaw accountable. What are you doing to protect civilians? What are you doing to live up to the entire reason why your military group exists? And that's to protect the unarmed, to protect the civilians. And again, I'm not naive, I'm not an idealist, but those conversations have to be happening, and they have to be happening by groups like the United Nations, by the diplomatic community, who have to be willing to go to the military actors and demand answers for what they're doing in detail to protect civilians. Unfortunately, there have been many areas where I've seen this work. In Afghanistan, my team, we did a lot of work directly with the NATO forces, with the Afghan National Security Forces, but also with the Taliban, to open up a dialogue on protection of civilians and how to reduce civilian casualties. Here, unfortunately, in Myanmar, that is apparently, that's unfortunately been seen as too absurd. Why would the Tatmadaw want to talk about this? Well, the Tatmadaw has to start being made to talk about this. And that is really at the core of human rights reporting and verification, is people should not be able to deny what's going on. And that should be at the heart of the accountability, or at least the first steps of the kind of accountability that we want to reach for. So, thank you.
Thanks, James. So can I just clarify, are you actually saying that there should be more effort made to send either UN or other representatives to Naypyidaw to talk to the military and attempt again to have a dialogue about protecting civilians?
Absolutely. I think that you cannot cede this ground of protection, the legal obligation to protect. You can't cede that ground to a group like the Tatmadaw. Right. You frankly can't cede it to PDFs or to ethnic armed organizations either. Right. They have to understand the core imperatives behind what it means to protect civilians. Right. And to avoid civilian harm. And right now, no one is having that conversation. And that's a very dangerous position for the civilian population, right, to have that be the situation on the ground.
Well, absolutely agree. And can I ask you, and then maybe ask some of the other panelists, the area we haven't really gone into is the other side. And when you talk about protecting civilians, I think an increasing trend has been the escalating campaigns of assassinations, urban attacks, which are often, increasingly the collateral damage there is targets that are non-combatants, increasingly either with families or colleagues, associates, whatever. And there is relatively little focus on that, partly because the crimes of being committed every day by military forces, I suppose, are so huge. But what is the position? Do you feel enough is being done to track resistance attacks on civilians, non-combatant, either officials related to the administration or even their relatives?
Right. The short answer is no. There's not enough being done to monitor those sorts of attacks. And again, it comes down to a lack of a presence on the ground of human rights documentation groups who are able to get that sort of information, operating in pro-military areas necessarily. But then, of course, the sources of information themselves are just as great at risk in those communities as they are in the rest of the country. Of course, it's a different type of risk, but certainly people that would be seen to speak to UN monitors or to civil society groups, you'd be asking, first of all, the UN or the civil society groups, you'd be asking a great deal of them in terms of putting their life in their hands, going to ask those questions. But then you also run this risk of, will people tell you the truth about what they saw?
Right.
And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to gather that information, but there are a lot of security concerns to keep in mind before you do it.
Thank you. And Ben, can I ask you as Myanmar Witness about that particular issue, which I think is becoming more of an issue?
Sure. So at Myanmar Witness, we've actually consistently documented and sat on the fence on both sides of the conflict. And I think it's really important that we look at both sides of the coin rather than focusing on one. Because if we think about chain of causation of violence, and I'll use a specific case for that. So last year in April or turn of May, we saw an escalation of violence in the north, and there were civilian communities being attacked. There were massive, huge influxes of IDPs into Thailand. And around one specific event that actually caused that, which was a small PDF-related attack on a police station in Mumbai. These videos went viral online, lots of videos of sit-tat and police and SAC officers in trenches. I think there were about 40 to 50 casualties, very much celebrated by PDF. Specific photos of captured live police officers. We don't know what happened to them after that event. And a lot of this was paraded online. Now, if we have a look, that is actions from one side. The returning side, which is sit-tat, came in the next day and reportedly...
Sit-tat being military.
Sit-tat, sorry. I don't want to call them Tatmadaw just because it's honorific. So sit-tat. So they sort of rolled in the next day and basically launched an artillery indiscriminate attack across the entire town, targeting primarily civilians. So targeting primarily not the actual actors that attacked the base, but civilians. And it's important to look at that because this is an overuse and an escalation of violence, with the victim at the end of the day being civilians. And so for us, I think we believe, and it's our kind of moral fibre, to document both sides of the conflict, because at the end of the day, that escalation of violence always impacts the civilians. And that's who we're representing at the end of the day, and that's who we're trying to document the lives of.
Right. So I'd like to ask some of the reporters' views on that question about, the covering both sides of the conflict, concerns about the civilians caught in the middle and reporting also on the other side. I mean, do you have views on that? So you're looking at me. Do you have a view on that?
Can you please repeat the question again?
It's about both sides and the fact that more recently we're seeing a lot of more escalating campaign of assassination, say, of administration officials, some of them very junior, or, people working for the electricity company, or indeed, well, very well, even business executives, assassinations and bombings, and whether that also is, whether you feel that enough attention is being paid to that.
Right. Well, this is a very sensitive question, but I will try my best. Please feel free to correct all of you. I mean. Well, like Ben mentioned, it is extremely important to see the both sides of the coins, both sides of the coin, and of course the resistance group were also targeting the civilians who still have affiliation with with SITA, like Ben said. I mean, I really like that you are. I was pretty happy that Ben was using the term SITA.
Yeah, I think we just have to put it in context.
I was trying to catch the term. What was it? But it's good. It's lovely. Thank you for that. So anyway, so the resistance groups were targeting the civilians or the government staff. They have affiliation with the SITA, the military. And let's say if this is reported on local media, or if there is any criticism voice, it is very dangerous as well, even in the eye of the public, because the narration is that the current. Before saying that, I want to say that there is a huge amount of trauma that stays in the mind of every Myanmar citizen, because the military, Myanmar Line Army, has been killing basically everyone. They have been operating indiscriminatory attacks. Just recently, James has said about there should be like more dialogues in Nebido with the military. But I don't know, I believe that, you know, this military believe they have information that, okay, this is IDP camp, this is civilian area, but they just think that this may have some affiliation to the PDF, and then they bomb. You know, they don't care. They know that they are clinic, hospitals, schools. They know that they have this information, but they do it intentionally. You know, so that is why the amount of trauma in our people is extremely huge. So that's why the current narration happening right now is that it is fair to kill anyone who is affiliated to the military. And that is dangerous. That is dangerous of the future of my country, our country. It is extremely dangerous. And of course, we should talk more about it. We have to try to see both sides of the coin. But I still wonder what could be the best way to approach it. I'm not sure if I respond to this question.
Yeah, I think that's
correctly.
extremely
Yeah.
well put. Yeah, Tony?
Yeah, I want to make a couple of points on both sides of this. And I think it's important to understand when we're looking at the military in Myanmar, two things. One is this, and this is something I stress to people who may not know Myanmar society that well, but this is not an army. It's not just an army, as you have the Royal Thai Army or the Cambodian Army or the British Army or whatever. This institution is a social caste. It's a ruling caste. Some of them are armed, and a lot of them are not armed. A lot of them are part of an ecosystem, if you like, that is involved in politics, is involved in economics, is involved in society generally, even in religion, right? It's a whole social caste. And that means that when you have a civil war, as we do now, there is going to be a lot of messiness. That's one thing. And the other thing, which is worth stressing, which you just alluded to, is when you look at the military in Myanmar, you have to understand that there has been decades of a culture of impunity. Nobody questions the military. Whatever the military want to do, they will do, they can do, they have done, and that's it. So targeting IDP camps because they think maybe there are a few PDF elements in there, that's entirely acceptable. And it comes from a very long history. The other point on the other side of the coin, which I think is worth mentioning, is that the NUG, unlike the military, has been very clear on codes of conduct. Now, you can say, oh, these are guys sitting behind a computer talking to other people on Zoom, but nonetheless, the NUG has established codes of conduct, and there have been cases with PDFs, and I'm thinking of one particularly, I think it was in northern Magwe earlier this year, of a family being killed by a PDF. And that issue became, because there appeared to be a violation of codes of conduct, they announced, the NUG announced that they would undertake an investigation. Now, the results of that investigation are still out there somewhere. Maybe there won't be any, but they have at least put on the line that we believe in codes of conduct. You're not going to hear that from the capital.
Yeah. Touche. And yes, Sean, and also can I add though, because you might have a view on this, I'd like to also bring up obviously the big issue, which was, let's cast our minds back some years ago, but the whole Rohingya crisis and the appalling atrocities we saw then. I mean, do you feel that that's kind of become lost in the wash of these current issues? I mean, you know, it's not really something that fits in some of the debates we're having here now. Anyway, I know, Sean, you are involved with
First, let me
coverage.
add my
sure.
comment to the current discussion first.
Yeah.
So
Can you
I'm
speak closer to the microphone?
okay. So I'm started having concerns that people started seeing this as like two sides playing a fair ground in this situation, which is completely not true. So this is not like two equal sides playing on the fair battleground. So there's this one huge hunter who has been doing all those atrocities, and they are people, they were civilians, and they are forced to hold their arms. It's not their choice like to hold their arms and become the people defense forces. So their choice would be just normal civilians, but they are forced to, in this situation. So these people are defending the attack from the military. So it is not fair like to blame on the people defense forces to initiate an attack, which then backfire by the military and then cause more harm on the civilians. Because sometimes being a civilian might be an advantage or a luxury. You know, these local defense forces doesn't have that. They just have to, they hold the arms because military have been bombing their village. So the whole village become like local defense forces because they have no choice. So that's one thing I just want to add my view on the discussion point. And for the Rohingya situation, so which I have done extensive reporting and done that. So it is, I mean, compared to the situation that's happening right now, like there are so many escalating atrocities. So I feel that it's just a natural that this situation is become a bit like that. But then still, I'm still doing them. I myself still doing the reporting on the Rohingya situation, doing the
inside Rakhine and also in Bangladesh.
Both. Like I mean, as a correspondent working for international news agency, I collaborate with my other colleagues from the Bangladesh or from Myanmar side, and like working on the more stories regarding the Rohingya situation. But then, of course, we couldn't pay as much attention as we did before because there's all other
so much more.
Yeah, there's so much more. Yeah, happening. And also, I wanna address to the earlier discussion point, which I would have to strongly disagree on the fact that Myanmar media or Myanmar journalists cannot do the independent reporting on what's happening on the ground because things are so much complex right now. Information are much scattered, but still like so many journalists are sacrificing their lives on the ground and trying to get the information out to the international community as much as they can. And many journalists, including me myself, lack proper training or proper systematic technologies, but still we are journalists and we have like ethics and we are following them very strongly and doing the reporting partially. And I would have to say like Myanmar journalists can say Myanmar narrative, Myanmar story as much as any international journalist would do. So I just want to add that comment. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Did you want to say something about the Rohingya question, James?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the Rohingya issue has jumped much more highly now, I think, in the conscience of many just because of the resurgence of the conflict in Rakhine State. But I think that what the conflict in Rakhine State has really put a magnifying glass on is the fact that no progress was made over a course of 4.5 years, where the military and the previous government kept saying that they were working towards creating conditions conducive for the Rohingya to return. That didn't happen. And now you still have the massive number of IDPs still from the 2012, 2016, 2017 crises, still in camps, now in camps in the middle of, caught between two armed parties fighting a much larger war than they were 2 years ago. And again, it's the civilians that are suffering. And then if you put all of that in context with the fact that there are still governmental authorities, planning to start returning Rohingya at any time that they get the chance, that makes the situation very alarming. And I think that stories like this have to get more attention because in the end, whether it be a situation like this with the Rohingya or whether it be how nasty this war has grown, the fact it's not getting more media attention internationally is shameful. Right. And that is where I think that the great there needs to be more to promote just the dimensions in which this crisis is getting worse and the fact that it's regionalizing.
Needs to be more what?
It needs to be in the media more. It has to be
Do you
promoted
mind telling
more.
the editors in our headquarters
I will
about
happily.
that?
Get me meetings and I'll do it gladly.
So I also, we discussed earlier about the various mechanisms now, IIMM and others, that are now collecting detailed information for, as Ben mentioned, and others for accountability purposes, later on maybe with something in mind for action. So we talked about at least several key ones, but how does that square what we've seen of what was collected of evidence in the Rohingya crackdowns of 2017, 2016? How do you think that compares to what was gathered and is being presented as evidence now in the various cases compared to what we're seeing or what we know is being collected now?
Right. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't compare to the types of evidence and information and the volume of evidence that was gathered from the 2017 crisis, because those victims are accessible. Because the information, whether it be physical evidence of what happened to the people on their bodies, or the information they were able to gather on their phones, that information was available. They were able to be interviewed in detail. Right now, it's really only detainees being released after being tortured that have made it outside of the country. There are instances in which cases involving violations of that sort are now being explored by prosecutors in other countries.
Images, right?
Of course, satellite imagery would be very useful. It's going to be critical whenever we look at the campaign of burnings. It's going to be critical when we look at how airstrikes are being used and how other violations are committed. But you won't find a prosecutor that will be willing to go forward just with satellite images and aerial photos. It'll be a critical component that will have to be underlined by, of course, having real victims and witnesses that they can interview, depose, and then take to a court that is willing to exercise jurisdiction. Right. And so that's a process. It's going to be a long process, and so we need the ICC involved. We need third countries to get their criminal jurisdictions involved, to use universal jurisdiction. The net of accountability has to close at some point. Right. And so that's why evidence that Myanmar Witness is gathering is going to be critical to that effort in future.
Right. And Ben or Leoni, do you have thoughts on that and how it compares to, I don't know what you were doing back in 2016?
Sure, I can maybe speak a little bit first. I talk quite quickly, so I promise I won't take too much time. And then we can hand over to Leoni.
The microphone.
Is that okay? Yeah, cool. So one of our sister projects called the Acheli Project, here's a little case study for you, actually documented every single village that burnt down, so every single building, to the point where you got 32,188 buildings almost burnt down in Rakhine State between 2017 and 2020. Also documenting where the land was bulldozed after that, cleaning up the evidence, and then where that was built on top of using Chinese manufactured buildings as well. Interesting. Now that's interesting because we didn't have any other information coming out about that. That was captured on satellite imagery. That's proof. What the good thing about that project is that you can look at that website. It's called Acheli. You can go to that website. You can rip the database. You can follow through with a methodology, which is why our verification and open source is so helpful. And we've worked with the IIMM, handed that information to them, and I like to call it a little bit of cooking.
Do you want to say what IIMM is?
Sorry, Independent Monitoring Mechanism of Myanmar. So I like to call this a little cooking class. We hand the cake over to justice and accountability mechanisms. We hand the recipe over to them, how to do this, and we hand the ingredients over. So that what my colleagues have mentioned about getting the ICC to do this, getting the IIMM to do this, or justice and accountability mechanisms, they can rip our work, they can read the recipe, follow it, and make their own cake in the exact same way. That's how easy we've made some of this work done. We do the exact same thing for what's happening now. So I think that's quite helpful for justice and accountability mechanisms, to be honest.
Well, has it been helpful from taking into account what you did in 2017?
I want to hope so, because it took us a lot of hours. For some of these mechanisms, they are a little bit of a black box. So, and that's just, widely known. And as we've sort of spoken about, it takes a long time to do prosecutions, to do this sort of international accountability. So there's no overnight process. It's not a journalism piece that can just be banged out like that. This is years, a long-term goal. And that's why we need to look at those other two factors of accountability, sanctions and media as well. The media here play just as an important piece as the ICC in raising these issues, because then the IIMM, the ICC, know what cases to focus on. And they have the recipe, they have the ingredients, and they can make their cake too.
Well, I hope they don't burn it. Do you have anything to add to that? No? Yeah, okay, very quickly. And then we're going to turn to questions, if anyone has a question. But after
I'll
you...
be very, very short. Ben has talked about the international accountability. And before
Can you
that...
speak into the microphone?
And before that, we were talking about the civilians who has affiliation with the military. They were targeted by the defense groups. And I mentioned that the Myanmar people in Myanmar had like a big amount of trauma. That is why. So I'm just trying to raise my voice. Thank you. So people in Myanmar, we had like big amount of trauma in our mind, and that's why civilians affiliated with the military were targeted, and majority of the people were like, oh, it's fair, But that is very dangerous for the country. So now I'd like to connect the cause of trauma with what Ben and Anthony has said. This military has been committing the same crime to the Karen people in the 50s, 60s, and all different decades. And they have been doing the same thing to Rohingya community. And they are doing the same thing now, even in central Myanmar and many other communities. But they still have their impunity. There is no action, or there is not even like any interest. Like they are like cakes and recipe, like ready to take action on this military. But nothing happened. So that is why Myanmar people thought that no one is taking action on this military. There is no action. So that's why these small local defense groups, they were formerly civilians doing their own job. Like Sean said, they were forced to pick up guns and fight them. So then they were forced to target those civilians as well. So these all are looping, and they are all connected, and all these things are repetitively happening. So that's what I want to raise. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. That's a very powerful point. Okay, very quickly, and then we'll...
No, there's one thing I would like to add on that is that, one of the things that I think has been very well established by the documentation that's gone on is there are two different conflict dynamics going on in Myanmar. One is, the PDF movement and the ethnic groups that have decided to fight the Tatmadaw. The other dynamic is the Tatmadaw is launching attacks against civilians. And they are not primarily fighting PDF groups and EAOs. They are primarily targeting civilian targets. That's the four-cut strategy. That's how it plays out. That is exactly what they're doing. So there is very much a difference in how they approach conflict and attack. And as you say, that is a dangerous cocktail because it produces explosive results that then impacts on civilians as well.
Right, I see. Well, but I would tend to agree with Ong Nang So that they actually seem to be targeting everyone, not rather than PDF's civilians, but it seems the magnitude of the targets now, and it does seem fairly indiscriminate.
Yeah, but that's also where the information, the restriction on the information available is so damaging, because I think a lot of people, including journalistic outlets, will look at the the statistics that are available out in, I mean, because journalists love statistics, everyone knows that. And they look at the numbers of people that are reported as killed as being around 2,700. And yet, you know, we know that the numbers are much higher than that. But we cannot reliably and credibly say how many civilians have died.
What would
and
you
that's a
guess?
huge problem. I can't take a guess but I do know this, after 16, 17 months of launching repeated military offensives against villages in areas like Sagaing, like Magwe, Kachin, Chin, Kayin, Kaya, and to think that only 2,700 people have died is fanciful.
Yeah.
And after repeated airstrikes, the burning of villages, summary executions, it's a lot higher.
Would
But
you
the
add a
lack of
0
those-
on it?
I think you could reliably do that, but I would be hesitant to do so, especially after the way Anthony broke down the statistics of military
military
killed.
killed,
So I won't do that, but I will say that the inability to put more exact figures or to paint a more exact picture is something that's working against our efforts.
Right, exactly. Thank you. Questions? I can see one up there. Letitia, will you go to the microphone and perhaps identify yourself and direct your question, please?
Yes, I'm Letitia van den
Oh,
Assen.
can you speak into the microphone? Yeah, thank you.
My name is Letitia van den Assen. I'm Dutch, and I'm an independent diplomatic expert these days. I have many other pasts, but that's what I'm doing today. First of all, I'm always, whenever I hear about what's happening in the area of criminal accountability, including international criminal accountability, I'm very impressed, and kudos to all who work on this. I know how difficult it is. I live in The Hague. I don't necessarily know much about the Myanmar cases there, but I know how the institutions there work. It is slow, it is painstaking, sometimes it's extremely frustrating. I know how difficult it is. If you talk about criminal accountability, that is part and parcel of transitional justice. And basically, we've only been talking about, and not only here, but in other fora as well, and it happens because you cannot talk about everything that is happening or that should be happening in Myanmar at the same time. But I think it's important to look at what can be done in order to look at other dimensions, other essential elements of transitional justice, whether it's preparations for reconciliation, social, some of the work that, for example, the NUG is doing already on that doesn't get much coverage. And particularly also in the humanitarian field. I haven't heard much about humanitarian tonight. And I know this is not a night only necessarily for humanitarian, but it is important. And I wanted to raise with you particularly a question that's been coming up recently much more, and that's the principle of resistance humanitarianism. Humanitarian resistance, it's also called. It's a concept. It's not necessarily new, but it's been brought up again by, I think, one of the most prominent humanitarians, Hugo Slim, used to be with the ICRC, now at Oxford University, and has written a very, I think, brilliant essay on the importance of resistance humanitarianism. And that means that, he was really taken aback himself by what he saw as he traveled the world, by what you see in Myanmar also, that donors don't even want to touch or think of giving any resources to ethnic armed organizations and others. And there are good reasons for that. But what he does say, what needs to be discussed, and that's why I'm raising it, is that there, he talk, and he goes through history, but there are many cases where organizations on the military side are actually fighting a good fight. They're defending themselves, they're doing what their people want them to do, And they have another arm, which is the humanitarian arm, which does not fight. It operates on its own. And his assumption is that we need to have this conversation urgently, that in all of these cases, you should be able to convince the donors that they should be working through these humanitarian branches. And he mentioned, obviously, Ukraine, it's happening all the time. Why can it happen in Ukraine and not in Myanmar? You think of the example, and then I'll stop, of the white helmets in Syria. That's another one that was getting that kind of... And all I'm hoping is that there will be more discussion around this particular issue. And I would want to hear, maybe particularly from James, whether any thought is being given to doing more with that concept and spreading the word. Thank you.
James, do you want to... Since it seemed to have been addressed to you.
Well, I mean, Hugo Slim's article is extremely compelling. I'll say that. My remit is not humanitarian service delivery, but I will say that I hope the donor communities look hard at their strategy, because what they've done so far, I'm not so sure has been terribly successful. And so I do think that there has to be a lot of thinking around both how funding is used and to benefit Myanmar's people.
Right.
So can I just ask Letitia, I mean, as I understand it, the question is, if you drill down to it, it's should the donor community, should the, quote, international community be providing humanitarian aid to ethnic resistance organizations? Is that correct? That's it, right. Got it. Right. So basically, you're advocating for this to be ramped up. Great.
Right. If anyone else wants to ask a question, we have one more here, and then I think we'll wrap it up fairly soon after that, unless there's any others.
Hi, my name's Patty Parker. What about the role of Buddhism? I would think that they would have a powerful seat at a table and through mediation and building conscience on all sides.
Right. Well, I'm sure.
Can I just ask the lady? Your question is Buddhist institutions inside Myanmar or the
Myanmar.
international Buddhist community?
Well, it could be both, but beginning with Myanmar, inside Myanmar.
Yeah, I can say I think we've seen extreme examples cutting both ways, and in fact, really as much of a problem as in some cases. But it would okay. Would you?
Yeah. Talking about
would you like to say something about?
Sure. Well, I don't know how to start. No.
Can you try?
I will try my best. Well, also before answering this question, I want to say that I'm not a Buddhist. Just to be clear information, so I will try to be fair as a Myanmar citizen. Buddhism in Myanmar in this day, it's pretty much mixed up with politics, and the military. It was like they were building pagodas, they were making donation events, they were giving honorable mentions to many rich people. They pretend like they are good Buddhists. They respect religion. They never insult any other religion. So in their mind, they are very religious, and they were protecting their own religion and their nation and the race. So that's what they think. And they also think that this is actually like worth doing, because any other opposition groups like Dawn San Suu Kyi, NLD, or activists, or even media organizations, they are, how to say, they want to destroy the race and the religion and the nation. That's why the military has a duty to protect it. And that's why they thought that they're doing good deeds, good things. You know, that's what Mao Lai or any other military leader has been actually thinking. So, and in reality, they would easily arrest a monk, like an elderly monk, who is like barely able to move around, and torture him or even kill him. For example, 2007 Saffron Revolution. So in their mind, they thought they were protecting their own religion and race. They are good Buddhists, but they don't care even if a good monk is opposing their idea, opposing their political narrative. They would easily disrobe this monk and put him in interrogation, torture him, or even kill him. And just recently, according to a local media, Sean, please correct me if I'm wrong. I read somewhere the military gave an honor to a very notorious monk, Wiratu, who was in the face of Times Magazine. They honor him, you know. So, but their other monks, they were in prison. They were disrobed, tortured. And on the National Day, which was last week, there was like a big amnesty. And we have seen a picture of a well-known monk. He was pro-democracy. He ran a lot of like charity works. He was a supporter of the Dawn San Suu Kyi and the democracy movement. But he was sent to prison. And he looks so different, like he looks like he was severely sick or something when he got out of the prison. So I don't think Buddhism or any other religion will be able to stop all these atrocities committed by the military. There are not many things to do against them.
Right, and let's not forget the Viratu and all the other monks that are way on the other side. So.
Yeah, I mean, Buddhism itself, the real Buddhism itself, we learn a lot about Buddhism, and we have so many friends and so many close friends who are Buddhists as well. So, and there are many respectable Buddhist monks. I was so much inspired by monks who led Saffron Revolution, but they were like torture. I witnessed that some even like lost their memories, you know. So the military would anything they want, even they are Buddhist monk or whoever.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Omnang. So, finally. All right. Gentleman up there, please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Phil Robertson with Human Rights Watch.
Sorry, Gwen. Something I wanted to add about that, something we've been seeing regularly on the ground. First of all, I would have loved another little overview by Mr. Davis about how the society in Myanmar works. After the military has been in charge for so long of every little aspect with a total monopoly on power, the structure of Buddhism as a system, as a caste, is another system of power that is being exploited for propaganda reason, using concept of Buddhism such as harmony and peace is being exploited by the military consistently. What we have seen is a lot of this structure that is exploited and or aligned with the military. Two cases I will refer to just give an idea. A lot of these new aircraft that are being brought in and commissioned into use with the Myanmar Air Force and later used to bomb people, monks at the highest level of ranking are present in this ceremony. They are given donations by the higher ranking officers of the different branches of the military. They participate in ceremony of blessing the different aircrafts. So they're pretty much part of the whole machine. Another dynamic that Myanmar Witness has been observing pretty regularly is how this hierarchy is exploited even more when we talk about smaller urban center. So if you imagine a countryside ecosystem where probably there is no mayor, probably there are no officials, but there is a pagoda and there are monks. There are monks. Those are the long arm of the military uses that system for the control of that territory and the people as well. So one of the phenomena we have been monitoring is the constitution. This is kind of a older story, but the recent arming or rearming of certain paramilitary units formed by local veterans or even normal civilians that are forced to join in these units to combat what allegedly are PDFs that are infiltrating these countryside rural communities. And here you see the monks being an integral part and sort of the link between the military and the local people, because that's where they've been living, because these are the community they've been leading. Again, I'm stressing this, in several decades in which these two entities, not at the same level, but strictly intertwined, have been the only source of power and control over the country.
Right. Okay.
I would just jump in to say we're about to publish a report on a well-known figure from Mabatha, which is a ultranationalist monk group that's working quite closely with the military in the north for some of the human rights abuses being committed in Sagaing.
Thank you very much. Final question. Okay, Phil.
Thank you. My name's Phil Robertson. I'm with Human Rights Watch, and I'm also a board member here at the FCCT. I wanted to actually ask, we've talked a lot about people's war inside Myanmar, but we haven't really talked about the frontline states. And I think so much what's going to happen next in terms of what is going on inside Myanmar is affected in part by the policies and the actions of the governments of India, the governments of China, and the government of Thailand. You know, we've seen crackdowns in Thailand on activists and dissidents at the border. There's a significant number of people who are trying to leave the country to go to a third country and are being blocked. China continues to engage with the military economically, and perhaps military. India continues to sell arms. All of them are, I think, probably blocking efforts to try to provide not only humanitarian assistance, but also military assistance, which the PDFs are after. So how does this all play out? And how do these frontline states, I mean, is there a way to change their policy? Is there a way to sort of make them more supportive of, you know, this people's movement?
Can I
Yes, sure.
propose an answer to that question? I think essentially, and the people of Myanmar realized this a long time ago, very shortly after the coup, they're on their own, right? The frontline states, as you call them, are actively involved with the military regime, and the international community is good at issuing statements about atrocities, but not doing very much else. That may be beginning to change, but essentially the people of Myanmar are on their own. And I think the critical dynamic in changing that situation, as far as the frontline states goes, is what happens in the coming 6 to 9 months inside the country. How the military conflict in Myanmar plays out in the coming months will be a critical factor. And if the resistance, generally speaking, right, including the NUG, PDFs, EROs, if the resistance can establish what I term a convincing momentum towards something approaching victory, towards the taking down of this military regime, if that momentum can be established in the coming 6 to 9 months, then you will see the attitude of the international community, and by extension, the attitude, particularly of Thailand and India, possibly changing. But until that momentum is established, we're going to be waiting. So it's really up to what happens on the ground inside Myanmar. That's my opinion.
Thanks, Tony. Anyone else want to add to that? No? All right. I'd really like to thank our panelists for, I think, an excellent discussion, really well-balanced, wide-ranging, and really got to the heart of a lot of things there. I would also urge people to try and look at these Myanmar Witness images on the wall there and download the report.
Great.
The QR code is sitting over there on the laptop. Richard, do you want to just walk over and show? It's just over there. You can just point a phone at that QR code and download it. There, Richard is pointing at it. Do keep an eye on our website. We've got a couple more excellent Myanmar-related events. And on a lighter note, Friday night we have a fantastic trivia night. All are welcome, no charge, and you can just come in and be trivial for a change. Finally, but most of all, I'd like to thank our brilliant panelists tonight. It was really a great discussion. And thanks to Shun and Ong Nang So for travelling here to Bangkok for the talk. And thank you all for listening. Good night.